We are conducting a Lunch and Learn Roundtable. We're going to be discussing crisis communications. We have with us Diane Chase from C4CS. This is a practitioner of crisis communications. I come from a perspective of having developed crisis management plans, and as a corporate executive having had to manage crises. I'd like to introduce Dirk Lindenbeck. He is president of Stainless Valve Company, and he is participating with us. He is also a board of advisors member, and we are going to be covering a number of different topics. So I will begin by setting a baseline. What is a crisis?
The way I define a crisis is any extreme event that impacts your business and causes damage to your reputation, brand equity, and bottom line. So it's not just the dollars that might be impacted, it's the people, it's your reputation most of all. And it's very, very hard to repair a reputation, as we have seen with so many companies in the news. They don't approach it transparently, forthrightly, quickly, and start to develop some sense that they are going to take ownership of the crisis. So it's something that, one of my favorite phrases is, it's so much better to prepare and prevent than repair and repent.
That's a good statement. We'll come back to that. That's one of the issues that I had to deal with as a corporate executive was, how do you kind of set what is it that you want to accomplish? What are your goals and objectives with crisis communication? You've got a crisis, you are responding. What are your goals? I mean, you've talked about the fact that you want to, prepare and prevent, and not
repair and prevent.
Yes. So what is it about some goals and objectives that you might have if you're in the process of developing a plan of action or a management plan for crisis communications? Are there specific goals and objectives, or does it kind of change depending upon your industry or business?
Well, it really, the overarching strategic goal is to move through the crisis and repair your reputation. And that, to me, the way I look at moving through a crisis is put people first. If you put people first, profits will follow. And there are so many examples of that, and in the reverse, what happens when profits are put ahead of people. So you might have an issue that you could deal with before it becomes a full-blown crisis, but you have to be prepared, and you talked about a plan, and that is just so critical. And it's surprising the number of companies, businesses, that don't have any sort of crisis communication plan. Now, say a manufacturing company, they'll have a response plan, an operational response. So they know how to put out the fire, they know to call the lawyer if there's, some malfeasance by the CEO or whatever. But they don't have that communication piece. So it really is like a Venn diagram. You have the managerial response, what's leadership doing? You have the operational response, how are you putting out the fire? And then you have the communications response. And all three of those entities have to work together in order to move through a crisis and be successful and mitigate the damage. It really is, it's a 360 situation. There's pre-crisis, when you need to get your plan, your training, go through your scenarios, repeat that training, run through it, so that when things are hitting the fan and emotions are high, you have to, you're going to have that drill in your head, and you're going to be able to respond without losing your cool.
I had come across an issue that we had in my company, and I wasn't directly involved, but it was one of our operating units. And we had a situation where an individual was driving at high speed, went through a traffic light hit our truck, because of the way the car hit it, rolled onto another car, killing a small child and severely injuring a family, the mother and father. This is a situation that we were facing because our name was on the truck that's
Sure.
lying on top of the car, but
Exactly.
we were not the proximate cause of it. It did go to a lawsuit. Our insurance company insisted that because we weren't the ones that were the precipitating factor, we went into a lawsuit. The jury found our company liable, and basically it came out that we had the deep pockets, the drunk driver that ran through the red light did not. That was something we had to get out in front of because, as I said, our image was being flashed across the news, and months later with the lawsuit, we were, quote, found guilty even though it wasn't something that we caused. Is in dealing with the truth and dealing with the facts, does that kind of color how you proceed in terms of your goals and objectives?
Well, the one thing you definitely do not want to do is come out and start blaming anybody or trying to say, out of the gate, that wasn't our fault, we didn't have anything to do with it, we were innocent victims too. And we hear that, we're just an innocent victim. And as I train on, it doesn't really address the reputational piece that you have to address. 3 things you can always say out of the gate: what you know about it, what you know the facts to be, what you're doing about it, and how you feel about it. And how you feel about it is when a lot of times corporate counsel will cringe. It doesn't mean guilt, doesn't mean anything. It means as a human being, I am really sorry for this horrific event. So get in front of it that way and be the face of your company. Don't be this big, cold, corporate talking head, because there's always going to be a victim, a villain, and a vindicator. And who's going to be the villain every time? It's going to be the company. Because Mary and Joe, who live down the road, are innocent victims. So empathy, absolutely. Don't blame, absolutely. State the facts, and you just have to trust that the facts are going to come through. How was the coverage in that? Did they pretty much factually cover the fact that your driver had nothing to do with that accident? Or?
Initially, no. Then, as the news cycle progressed, we were able to get out that our vehicle had been hit. And then the problem was it was months later that the lawsuit was adjudicated, and then, as I said, we were found liable for this issue. And so we had to come across with more of a focus on what is our media presence after the fact, and how do we, like you said, how are we going to prove that we're a good corporate citizen, having been found liable for this, even though it really wasn't our fault. So we had to basically move forward. We didn't want to kind of dwell on it and keep trying to say, look at this other person.
Right.
We moved forward. So we have no way of knowing what our impact was on the brand. I mean, I can't point that we lost business, but the point is that for a while, our name was not well
Being smeared,
respected in the community. Dirk, have you had any knowledge or similar situations on your side?
The example crisis in our plant, my son came 5 o'clock in the morning to the plant, and about 50% of the plant was underwater. Not very deep, but water all over. And he figured out that the problem was the hot water heater tank that has a valve and has typically sort of diagonally a pipe going somewhere on the ground, that's it. We had a bucket sitting underneath, so we knew where the water came from because the bucket was full and then from the bucket it ran over. And logically the thought was, this is a new tank which we did put in half a year ago. It must be the tank. Then in the subsequent communication between my two sons and myself and the maintenance manager and so on, the thought came up, it may have been a water pressure spike which made that valve trigger, and all the water came out because of that high water pressure. So my answer to that was, why don't you go around in the neighborhood and see whether there is somebody else with that same problem? And yes, they found another company which had the same problem. So it's pretty clear that it was the supply company, the water supply company, who is to be blamed for that. But just as an example, we could not plan for that.
Exactly.
Well, let's move to the next point of this, because you talk about the fact, and you've mentioned, there are all different kinds of things that happen. What is the process then that you go through? Crisis happens. What's the process? How do you kind of step into this?
You do have to your point, you do have to customize and respond to an individual crisis. You cannot plan for everyone, but you can look at your vulnerability assessment. Should always, step one, where are the vulnerabilities? Act of God included, right? Something that you wouldn't even imagine, just like that accident, you wouldn't even imagine. But operationally, who needs to be involved? So when I'm working with a client, a CEO, a decision maker, I say, what are the 3 things that keep you up at night about your business? And what is the one that is most likely to happen, do you think? And then I create a scenario around that. We set up the crisis response team. So you have to identify which parts of your enterprise need to be at the table. So you're going to have HR, you're going to have legal, communications, you're going to have those critical decision makers within leadership at the table. Now, you're going to have a tech person identified, but if it's an IT issue, they need to be at the crisis response table. If it's not, they probably don't. You're going to have, maybe your investor relations, your vendor resource person, your sales person, depending if it's a product malfunction or a recall or contamination. You'll have to think about the people who need to be at the table and identify them. But there are certain people who should always be involved with the crisis response team, and obviously it's generally the C-suite people, including communications and HR. So that's step number 1, the vulnerability assessment. Then put together that crisis plan. And there's all kinds of, I'm actually working on a crisis response plan, crisis communication plan, I should say, now for a client. So some of the key sections, obviously an introduction talking about the company mission and values and that sort of thing, because when it comes to decision making in difficult situations on an urgent basis, you're going to have that touch point. What are your company values? What's your purpose? What's your mission? And that's the touchstone by which you make decisions during a crisis. So, and then the preparedness planning, everything from the strategic approach to the organizational structure, how you want your crisis response team to be put together, your actual response so that you know when to activate, like what are this happened, did it do this, we respond this way. Social media plays a huge part in this. So what's going on social media? Is this a troll? Do they have a ton of followers or 3? Do we respond or do we engage at all? I mean, all of those tipping points, right? So that needs to be part of your plan as well. And then, just resources in terms of stakeholder and media logs. Who are your key media outlets? Who are your key stakeholder groups, and what's the relationship? Does the CEO reach out to, your biggest client during a crisis to personally inform them? So the crisis communication plan, And then the training and the drill, the scenario-based training, the media training, the spokesperson. You have to have your spokesperson identified before a crisis, so you're not running around going, who's going to talk to the media? Or who's going to talk to the employees? Which is a very critical role. I always say, tell the family first. In other words, tell your employees first if something happens. You don't want them finding out on the news what's going on with your company.
In terms of notification, does it suffice to just send out an email blast, or are there other steps that, depending upon the severity or something, you may want to do something more? I mean, is there a videotape of the spokesperson or CEO that's included? I mean, what are some?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the channels by which you communicate need to be determined way ahead of time. So are your employees more used to checking the intranet? I think it was a short video from the CEO saying, here's what's going on, we're getting ready to talk to the media, I wanted to let you know first. Do you have a mobile notification system? Maybe you need them to come to the plant, or maybe you need to tell them, stay away, don't come in today. But that has to happen in such a short amount of time. There's a dark site that's included generally in my recommendations for a crisis plan, so that you keep this site with frequently asked questions if there's an incident on site, and you pull it up and you publish it so that the media can go there for Q&A. Your community, like the community around your facility, needs to know what's going on, because the worst thing that can happen is the rumor mill goes crazy because no one's communicating to them, so people just start making stuff up, right? And then trying to get all of that back in the box is just brutal.
In terms of the process, do you recommend practicing, kind of let's have a table talk walkthrough, or actually do things like, we're going to convene at this site, we're going to assume these are the particulars, we're going to practice, and we're going to have people in there? How important in terms of the process is practice?
It's critical. It's absolutely critical. Again, to have that muscle memory, so that you're not being driven by emotions and knee-jerking during a crisis, because you've been through it. So what I do is interview some of the key leadership in terms of writing out an entire scenario. It's this day, it's this time, you're at this plant, this just happened, boom. And then I'll have another inject. Okay, now it's 10:15 a.m., this just happened. The community is all over social media saying that you guys are a danger to the environment. Now what do you do?
Yeah.
And walk them through. Now that should happen at least once a year for every company, twice a year, depending on if key leadership changes. But tabletops you mentioned are also a good tool to stay fresh, and especially if you have a big new client, or there's an M&A coming down the road, or your competition is making big changes, how is that going to impact you? So maybe do a tabletop during the year.
I want to add another example when we're talking about process. I had a situation where one of my employees was at training, very young guy, young family, dies of a heart attack. Happened late Friday as they were closing up the class, and he was away, following our planning and our HR policies and communications. This was not something that was public, but in terms of the process, I had some negative consequences, because I came in immediately and went to the individual's desk, because I knew that we had several critical projects. And to your point, talking to a stakeholder, I pulled those files out so that I could then prepare to go talk to the stakeholders that, hey, we've had a problem, and we're not going to be able to keep on our schedule. We're going to have to circle back to you with rescheduling this. Part of the process that I went through was getting things set on his desk, kind of neatening things up, because I knew that I'm going to have somebody else come in behind me to kind of go through this and start picking up on this. And I went with our HR people to the family. I was with them and we explained, here are your benefits, this is what's happening. And so the family was well taken care of. We sent out a notice over the weekend that this had happened. And then we had somebody come in who was a counselor. And we said, we're going to pull different teams in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not going to ask you to individually go into this. But there was a blowback that people came in, saw that his area had been materially affected, meaning files are gone, his desk does not look like his desk. And the ramifications were people were thinking, we're already erasing him and moving on.
Bye.
So internal to my own process, I recognized that this was an element of a process that I should have been more sensitive to, that by making material changes on this individual's workspace and thinking that I was being efficient to help the rest of the team come in and take over, there was some blowback for that.
But what a great lesson learned. That's a really great lesson learned in terms of the sensitivities are so heightened in an emotional situation like that.
I think that can have legal implications too. For example,
Yeah.
my wife and I were in Germany, visited my stepmother, and 2 weeks later she died. So we had to go back, and we could not get into the apartment where she lived, although she was not in there. She died at the hospital. Well, she died in a bus, but was already taken care of. So we weren't allowed to go into that apartment unless somebody from the police department and so on was with us, so that we could not take away anything which we were not supposed to touch.
Interesting.
So that's why that is probably what we have to learn from that. Don't touch anything when somebody has died, because it may be obstruction of, what's it called?
Justice.
Justice.
Yeah.
So, well, let's move to another topic in terms, we've talked about process. Are there any toolkits that would be available? Are there, things that you can buy, or are there things that you have to kind of develop on your own because your company is unique? What is there anything in terms of toolkits to help?
Actually, that crisis communication plan should be jam-packed full of tools, kits. So standby statement templates for news releases, media alerts, news conferences, your a gathering space if there's some horrible accident on site and you have to meet off-site, where is that going to be? So all of those maps, if you will, should be included in your crisis communication plan. And I will just say that having an outside clear eye develop that crisis communication plan to think of and see things that you might not even be aware of, like signs showing where a room is, and media training as well. Because, for instance, I will ask a question that I don't have to worry about. He's never going to forgive me for that. I'll never get promoted. I'm not going to get my bonus. Internally, it's a human nature thing where you're going to probably pull some punches with your CEO or your boss of whatever nature, rather than just really ask those hard questions, which the media will ask, right? So I just recommend finding an expert to come in, do that vulnerability audit, find out where your issues and risks are. So what I say is it's our job to keep the eyes on the surface of the water and look for those little bubbles and see what's getting ready to jump out of the water maybe, and be prepared, right? So, but a crisis communication plan will have tools and templates and resources, your dark site ready to jump up. Have you identified who's going to own that dark site? Who's going to be updating your website all the time? Who's going to be the key point person for the employees? Are you going to have a town hall? What does that look like? Are you going to broadcast it? Tons of questions, and if you just have that ahead of time, and it's, you know, it's in there, you've gone through it, you're like, okay, rather than trying to make it up on the fly, and one little tiny mistake can just take things really in a bad way, and then trying to get that genie back in the bottle is just really, really difficult.
Well, we talked about the toolkit, and you've touched upon social media, and today's environment is such that everybody has a camera. Anything happens, it is going to get out there.
Absolutely.
Is there some guidance that you might have in terms of something happens? Social media, as you said, it's not only bubbling up, it's really popping out there. Is there kind of a process that should be followed in terms of what do you say first, and then how do you start trying to deal with it, and what do you do to bring others in on this, so that you're not on this on your own, that there are others that you may or may not, depending upon the situation, bring in?
There's a really nice couple of types of flow charts that I use in terms of, again, asking that this, you know, this was posted on Facebook. Okay. Again, looking at their followers, looking at their credibility. Are they a flamethrower, a troll? Do you want to engage? And a couple of things around that are to state your policy on your social media pages about vulgar language or threats or whatever, because you don't want to take down a negative post because it looks like you're hiding something. However, if someone really is completely off the wall, over the line, you can say this was deleted per our policy, as you can see stated here. But otherwise, don't let things just stay out there if they're not factual. The best way to engage someone like that is to ask them to come offline. Would love for you to give me a call, put your phone number out there, put your email out there, send me an email. Let me see if I can help resolve your concern or whatever it might be. So have that policy stated, have a one voice policy in your company. You're going to have different people that you're probably going to call on to say, oh, he just said that our mobile tech is, pits or whatever. I don't know what's going on, calling your tech person. But a one voice policy means everybody is saying the same thing.
Yep. So
you don't have HR saying one thing, your comms person saying another, your marketing person saying another to salespeople. You want to make sure that you have a one voice policy. So have those social media policies posted everywhere, and then and have that decision making matrix ready to go, because you don't want to get into a tit for tat, especially when it comes to the media, because they're always going to win.
We're talking especially about social media. Let's use another example. Let's say that, because Global Chamber, our interests are far-flung, our companies have a lot of international presence. Something happens on the international stage that may affect one of the companies that belong to Global Chamber. Any guidance, thoughts on what do you do when a foreign actor is doing something that may affect you, either directly or indirectly? Any thoughts?
It's a really important question. And another component of that planning and preparation and that vulnerability assessment. An issue or crisis that's happening with any of your stakeholders and relationships can impact you. I worked with a chemical company, and they used to have their name and logo all over the side of those chemical trucks on the highway. Well, again, innocent situation, but their logo, their name was all over the news, even though they had nothing to do with the accident. So that awareness and preparedness, again, in that assessment piece. So what, like blue sky, what could possibly happen that would impact our brand? So if you have a really prominent member who presented at a Global Chamber event, had coverage, and the next next thing you know, he's brought up on charges or something. You know, something terrible happens,
Yeah.
and he's just like spoken on, you know, on a global stage, right? Who's going to respond to it? What are you going to say? And you don't want to. Again, it's a really important time out of the gate to set the stage that you are being forthcoming, transparent, totally honest all the time, and dealing with it and not hiding from it, not blaming, not throwing, you know, dirt on somebody. We didn't have anything to do with it. I never met the man. Just being prepared to deal with a crisis that you are not responsible for or directly the cause of, but are impacted by association, and maintain your reputational piece.
Let's talk, go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt there, but you said don't blame somebody else. We had the situation that I was served with a lawsuit against our company. I never had something like that, so I had to ask the policeman what is this here and so on. So in any case, we were sued together with many other valve manufacturers and also one of our customers. And the first thing I did was I called a friend of mine. You have to have customers who are friends of yours. So I called him and I said, well, what's going on there? What is this story? So he told me all the background. And I said, okay, thank you, that's great, and I know what I have to do. Half an hour later, he called back and said, please don't tell anyone, because I don't want to get into trouble. I said, surely I will never tell anyone that you told me about that.
Right.
So my simple approach was, why do you contact us when our valve sits down there? And what happened 10 stories up on the top. So leave us alone, we have nothing to do with that. There may be other companies which may have something to do, but it's not us. So I pushed the responsibility to others, away from us. And I was not really very friendly in that letter which I sent to the law company. So that was the end of it. So we were lucky that it did not have other.
So the media did not pick that up? Okay.
Good.
That is good. Being proactive and, again, stating the facts in an unemotional way, which is hard to do a lot of times, and being very careful with, you know, you do want to run that sort of thing. Anything in print, anything you write, you need to make sure that corporate counsel signs off on it, because that will be evidentiary if there's a lawsuit. So.
Speaking of, we've talked about kind of structure and some of the process. Any thoughts on best practices? You just touched upon one that you better involve legal because some things may become evidentiary. Any other kind of best practices that you as a practitioner would recommend, you know, to the medium-sized businesses that you know kind of operate, as I said, sometimes internationally, sometimes locally, but any best practices top of mind?
Social media monitoring, because it drives so much. It can drive miscommunication, it can drive falsehoods, but it also can drive facts. It can help your reputation. So it can be a friend or a foe, but you have to stay on top of it. There's so many examples of crises that have started from a post on a Friday evening, and by the time everyone came to work on Monday, it was an explosion on social media, and the awareness was not there. So I would say media monitoring is a really important thing. And there are plenty of free tools out there to do that. You can also, you know, use more expensive tools if you really want a lot of deep dive. We work with a client who has an international concern in a very touchy or controversial area that one of their vendors is in. So they're staying on top of it. Again, they're not involved directly in the controversial piece, but they know that they have to be aware of what's going on because they need to be ready to respond. So media monitoring, I would say, and again, I can't stress enough the constant assessment and the constant training, preparedness, all of that kind of thing. No matter the size of your company, you can have a crisis communication plan. It doesn't have to be anything major.
In terms of my experience, I think one of the best practices is some really good advice to employees that when the company is facing a crisis,
Right.
here are your guidelines, here are your policies. These are the things that we're going to hold you accountable for in terms of, you should not be trying to speak for the company, etc. Anything else along that line?
Absolutely. To have all of those policies in place, and that can be included in a training to say, if someone is, and you see it all the time, an ambush interview in a parking lot at a company that someone was just arrested for, their CEO was arrested for sexual harassment or something, and they're trying to get quotes from people as they're leaving third shift or whatever. They should all know what to say. I'm sorry, I can't. Don't do this and run and whatever. But you're already guilty when you're doing that. Don't say no comment. You're already guilty. Just say, give them a standard line to say, I'm sorry, but I'm not authorized to speak to you, but I'm happy to connect you with our corporate spokesperson. Give me your card. Make sure that they do follow up. If you tell a reporter you're going to follow up with them, you better follow up with them. But you're right. Have those guidelines. Have the one voice policy. Have your social media policy so that they know that they can't get on social media and talk about your company.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to come from my background and make a final comment that crisis communication is very important to an organization, and disaster recovery planning, business continuity planning, those have all got to be integrated. Once again, any final thoughts on, here we've got a plan that may deal with the technical or the operations. And as you had raised earlier, there are some emotional or personal or some other aspects or brand aspects of this. Any final comment on
Well,
making
you
certain that
mentioned-
you integrate
Right.
this?
Integration is the key there. Alignment. So you can have, under your crisis communication plan, a segment that deals with your operational response, and then your business continuity plan, and then your communications plan. But again, none of it is going to be successful if people don't know how to communicate well. Just think about it, our daily lives. What would we do if we couldn't communicate? And we were always misunderstood. People were always, trying to figure out what in the world you want us to do or think or feel. You have to be able to communicate.
Well, thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Dirk, thank you for participating with us. I hope everybody that is watching this on our webinar series enjoys this. Thank you, and we're going to say goodbye from Global Chamber Charlotte.